But first, the big question in the media with the death of Queen Elizabeth has been, is this the Republicans' big chance? Moving to King Charles, a less popular man. Will this finally push Australians into backing a Republic instead? Well, already the answer seems to be no. The latest Essential poll, for instance, said Australians were still 50-50 in supporting the monarchy, supporting a republic, which sounds close, but in a referendum, to win it, Republicans need to win not just the majority of Australian votes. They also need to win the vote in a majority of states, and that's now looking impossible. So, what I think is being ignored is the damage this period of mourning has done to another referendum, the one the Albanese government actually wants to hold first, before the next election, a vote to change our constitution to set up an Aboriginal-only parliament. And I think the way that some Aboriginal activists, very prominent ones, have reacted to the Queen's death over the past week and a half has been a disaster for that. They have blown it. They've been hateful, they've been divisive, some have told the most ridiculous and reckless falsehoods and exaggerations. And I think they've put off a lot of other Australians, not just from them personally, but from their cause. In Britain, meanwhile, we've been seeing tremendous love for the Queen and country, an incredible coming together. But here we see activists, in contrast, peddling rage and contempt. And you start to wonder, what on earth is it that these activists actually want from the rest of us? What is their end game? Where is this hate taking us? Now, let me give you just a couple of examples. New ones. I'll leave Stan Grant for the end of the show. There's one. In Victoria, even Premier Daniel Andrews, a Republican from Labor's hard left, has seen this huge love for the Queen. And with an election coming on in just a couple of months, has announced, he thinks this is a vote winner, is changing the name of the Maroondah Hospital in Melbourne to the Queen Elizabeth. But wouldn't you know, Maroondah is actually an Aboriginal name. So let me introduce you to Marcus Stewart. This man identifies as Aboriginal. In fact, this Aborigine is co-chair of Victoria's Aboriginal-only Parliament, the first People's Assembly, set up by Daniel Andrews. And he says changing the name of this hospital to Queen Elizabeth Hospital is terrible. With just a few words, he says the government has turned the Maroondah Hospital into a culturally unsafe place for our people. This, he says, is a stark reminder of why treaty is so critical. It can put an end to the hurtful platitudes of the powerful. Now, for a start, you've got to ask, culturally unsafe? Someone like Marcus Stewart is going to feel unsafe there? I mean, seriously? How do you even feel culturally unsafe? Because, I don't know, maybe the hospital can even treat you for it. Look, just 600 people in Maroondah. 0.5% of the population, 0.5%, claim to be Aboriginal. Now, how many of them would seriously think, oh, golly, I'm less safe in a hospital that has the name of the Queen on the side? How many Aborigines refuse to go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Adelaide for that reason? Oh, culturally unsafe. How many refuse to go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Brisbane or any other hospital named after a royal? Now, pull the other leg, seriously. And the idea that a treaty with Aborigines would, as Marcus Stewart claims, stop any elected premier from even changing the name of a hospital, tells you that a treaty is fundamentally undemocratic. It's open to an abuse of the power of a few activists over a vast majority. A tiny few using their race, or at least the race they identify with, to overturn the decisions of the rest of us. And by the way, Daniel Andrews does want a treaty with Aborigines like Marcus Stewart. Setting it all up already with Marcus Stewart on board. Now, to another example of Aboriginal activists teaching us during this period of mourning that whatever they're selling, you don't want to buy. The Greens Senator Lidia Thorpe, a real race baiter, a hate preacher. She's been at it yet again. She's tweeted about this hospital. This is not what a treaty looks like, changing its Aboriginal name. What an insult to colonise us again. I mean, seriously? Again with this wild overreaction. We're being colonised. This crude division by race as well. And I think it's important to note in that context, when Lydia refers to us Aborigines, that her own father, Roy Illingworth, is white. I've talked to him. Why is he totally written out of Thorpe's Wikipedia entry, for instance, out of her ancestry on a Greens webpage? And this seems to be a metaphor for what seems an attempt now by the left to increasingly black out white names and symbols of our Western civilization. You've got the Greens already removing our Australian flag from its press conferences. You've got Labor MPs giving more prominence at their press conferences to the race flags instead. The ABC's flagship AM program this morning even refused to give the city they were broadcasting from its real English name.
Good morning, welcome to AM. I'm David Lipson, coming to you from Gadigal land.
But Lidia Thorpe, this Greens senator, went further. She's also tweeted away the Queen does not deserve her respect. She said, they buried our kids in the sand and kicked off their heads. Now, you want me to pay my respects? This isn't about an individual, it's about the institution she represents and the genocide that they're responsible for. The idea that there's been a genocide, that's false, but the idea that white Australians buried Aboriginal children in sand and actually had competitions to kick off their heads to see how far they could kick them is utterly insane. Now, this seems to come from a claim in a book by an amateur historian years ago. This historian allegedly reported what some woman had claimed her mother told her. Now, there's no proof this atrocity ever happened, and to be blunt, the idea that it did, that you could actually kick off a baby's head, is simply nutty. Physically, it's impossible. And the idea that we had Australians so sick, so totally depraved, they actually competed to do it. I mean, how crazy, how careless of the truth do you have to be to not just believe that, but repeat it publicly as the truth? Yet this Lidia Thorpe, a member of the Senate of this country, our Senate, passing laws over the rest of us, does believe this nonsense, this vile, inflammatory nonsense, and even believes the Queen was responsible and so she cannot pay her respects. That I find terrifying, because this woman, Lidia Thorpe, she's the Greens Justice spokeswoman, and she wants a national Aboriginal-only parliament now to push her agenda after a treaty, of course. I tell you, with an agenda like that, hatred, division, untruths, race power, eating away at our democracy, all that paraded now, at the very time that in Britain you see a very different agenda playing out on TV. People mourning their Queen. You see the love, you see the respect, you see the unity, such that even soccer star David Beckham, the former English captain, said no to a special pass. He lined up for hours with ordinary Britons, the great British public, in the dark at times, so he too could have just a few seconds in front of the Queen's coffin as she lay in state. And then he bowed in respect for her life of service to her country, a service of dignity, of restraint, of kindness. What a contrast to Lidia Thorpe, to other race activists, all the way up to Meghan Markle with her cruel untruths. And it's a contrast that, now that we all see it for ourselves, will, I hope, help kill Labor's plan to divide us by race, will kill this racist plan. Now that we see what unity looks like instead, how sweet and beautiful that is.